In every corner of Africa, stories breathe, tales buried in dust, whispered through firelight. You're about to hear one of them. Welcome to African Horror Stories. The Whispering Stones of Kwadladla. In a secluded South African village, a young woman's grief over her lost child opens a terrifying door to the trickster Tokoloshe, whose presence transforms her home into a nightmare of whispers and vanishing boundaries. In the heart of KwaZulu-Natal, nestled between rolling hills that stretched like slumbering giants, lay the village of Kwadladla. It was a place steeped in tradition, where the rhythm of life was dictated by the sun and the wisdom of ancestors. But for Nomusa, the sun had not shone brightly for many months. The laughter in her eyes had faded, replaced by a deep, unyielding shadow. Nomusa had lost her child, a tiny, fragile life that had flickered into existence only to be cruelly extinguished by a fever that swept through the village like a hungry wind. The pain was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, stealing her breath. She spent her days in a haze of sorrow. The quiet of her small mud-brick home amplified the silence of her empty arms. Her husband, Themba, strong and kind, tried to comfort her, but some wounds were too deep for words. The elders, with their knowing eyes and gentle hands, performed rituals to cleanse the grief, to guide the spirit of the departed. They spoke of acceptance, of the natural cycle. But Nomusa found no solace. Her mind replayed every fleeting moment, every tiny cry, every soft touch. One scorching afternoon, Nomusa walked past the Mfula, the river, where the women washed clothes. She didn't notice them or their chatter. Her eyes were fixed on the stones. Not the smooth, water-worn ones, but the sharp, black rocks that jutted out near the rapid drop. The rocks where the children had been warned never to play. It was there she saw it, a small, smooth, oddly polished pebble, shaped perfectly like a little skull. It wasn't natural. It felt wrong. But in her deep fog of sorrow, she didn't cast it aside as she should have. Instead, a twisted, desperate thought took root. Perhaps she could keep a piece of the world her child had left behind. She carried the stone home and placed it high on a shelf above her bed, whispering a promise to the quiet air, a foolish promise of remembrance. That night, the dreams began. They were not dreams of her lost baby, but of a small, hunched shadow darting between the trees, giggling with a wet, clicking sound. When she woke, the bed felt lower than it should be. The Tokoloshe is not merely a ghost. It is a malevolent spirit, a dwarfish creature summoned by the wicked, often by placing 3 such stones in a desolate place. It is a trickster, a destroyer of peace, known to torment its victims by whispering secrets and making things fall, or, most terrifyingly, by lowering the legs of the bed so it can reach you in your sleep. Nomusa and Themba had always kept their bed on bricks, a simple protection everyone in Kwadladla knew. But now the bricks seemed shorter. Every morning Themba would straighten them, convinced they had shifted in the night. Every evening Nomusa would swear the bed felt lower, its wooden legs closer to the cold, dusty floor. The smooth, black stone on the shelf seemed to absorb the light, turning the darkness in the hut absolute and heavy.
The air grew stale, and the deep, rich smell of wood smoke and earth was slowly replaced by something metallic and sour. The Tokoloshe is attracted to disorder, and Nomusa's silent grief had left her home vulnerable. Small things began to vanish: a favorite spoon, a sewing needle, a single earring. Items didn't simply get lost, they disappeared from plain sight, only to reappear in the most unsettling locations, inside the cooking pot or balanced precariously on the sharp edge of a tool. One evening, Themba returned from the fields, his body tired, his mind troubled by the strange arguments he was having with his wife. He sat by the fire, watching Nomusa stir their meager supper, when he heard it clearly for the first time. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice low. Nomusa didn't look up. "Hear what, Themba? Only the ghosts of my sorrow." "No," he insisted, standing up quickly. "A laugh, a tiny, cold laugh." He searched the small hut, his oil lamp casting nervous, jumping shadows. Nothing. He checked the roof beams, the baskets, and finally he checked the bed. The wooden blocks that supported the head of the bed were gone. Themba stared at the cold floor where the brick should have been. The bed was resting directly on the earth, exactly as the stories warned. All the protective measures they had maintained since childhood, gone, spirited away. That night they placed the bed firmly on new, thick wooden posts, wedging them deep into the soil. Themba reinforced the door latch and even sprinkled salt across the threshold. He felt foolish, yet a cold dread had replaced his exhaustion. He lay awake, listening to the heavy silence, waiting for the Tokoloshe. Around midnight, a terrifying sound erupted from the kitchen area. It was the sound of the large metal cooking pot being repeatedly hammered against the wall. Not a drop, but a forceful, deliberate beat. Themba leapt up, grabbing his machete. He rushed into the dark kitchen, his lamp shaking violently. The noise stopped the instant he entered. The pot was back on its hook, swaying gently. But there, on the earthen floor, etched clearly in the dust, was a single, small footprint. It was shorter than a human foot, with long, thin toes. It looked wet, and it was facing the door as if the creature had just been standing there, bagging the pot, watching them sleep. Themba and Nomusa looked at the footprint, and then at each other. They didn't need to speak. They both knew they were no longer alone in their grief. A terrifying, diminutive thing had been invited into their sorrow, and it had accepted the invitation. The days blurred into a haze of fear. Themba began to stay awake through the nights, clutching his machete, his eyes scanning the gloom. But the Tokoloshe was cunning. It rarely revealed itself fully to the strong-willed. Instead, it preyed on the vulnerable, twisting minds, sowing discord. And Nomusa, still adrift in her sorrow, was its primary target. The whispers grew louder, clearer. They started as soft suggestions just beyond the edge of hearing when Nomusa was alone. "You could have saved her," they'd hiss from the shadows beneath the cooking fire. "You weren't strong enough." Her grief, once a heavy cloak, now felt like a gaping wound exposed to the cold, insidious touch of the creature. She would snap at Themba, accusing him of negligence, of not caring enough. He would retort, his patience fraying, accusing her of imagining things, of clinging to a sorrow that was tearing them apart. The Tokoloshe thrived on this.
Themba could not stand by as his wife and his home were devoured by unseen malice. He knew the source of the terror wasn't Nomusa's mind. It was the Tokoloshe, and it was feeding on their sorrow. Leaving Nomusa with a neighbor for safety, Themba walked the long, dusty path to the next village, seeking the help of Mazondi, a renowned Sangoma, a healer and diviner. Mazonde did not need to be told the problem. As Themba approached her kraal, she looked up, her eyes ancient and sharp. "You carry a small shadow," she pronounced, her voice raspy like dry leaves. "A small thing that demands much. It has been invited by a moment of desperate weakness." Mazonde performed a divination, casting her bones and shells. She pointed straight to Themba's chest. "It is bound to something close to you, something you carried home from the river. It must be returned to the river, but not before you understand its true purpose." She handed Themba a small pouch of dried herbs and ash. "Spread this in your home. It will not destroy the thing, but it will slow it. Then you must go to the place where your sorrow began." The Sangoma revealed the horror. The Tokoloshe was not merely haunting them, it had been drawn by the despair to bring back the lost child's spirit, but not whole. It wanted to cycle the spirit through pain, trapping it forever between worlds as its own servant. To stop the Tokoloshe, Themba had to cut the anchor it had set. The anchor, she explained, was buried deep where the child's spirit rested, waiting for the Tokoloshe's corruption. Armed with his machete and the Sangoma's protective ash, Themba returned home. He found Nomusa sitting motionless, staring at the black stone on the shelf, whispering things he couldn't understand. He broke the silence, his voice firm. "I am going to the burial place now. The Tokoloshe is bound to that place. I must dig." Nomusa barely reacted, but as he turned to leave, she pointed to the shelf and her voice returned, cold and empty. "He says you cannot take his stone." Themba didn't hesitate. He smashed the skull-shaped stone with the flat of his machete. It shattered, releasing a sudden metallic stench that made his eyes water. He ran to the desolate patch of ground where their baby was buried. It was just before dawn and the air was freezing. Themba dug fiercely, the cold ground resisting his efforts. The Tokoloshe did not like this. As his shovel hit something solid, the chittering around him erupted into a furious, wet shriek. Shadows raced across the ground. Themba looked down into the shallow grave. There, lying on the white cloth, was not the remains of his baby, but a small, grotesque wooden figurine, crudely carved and stained with mud. It was an effigy. It was the Tokoloshe's anchor. The moment Themba saw the hideous effigy in the dirt, the crude wooden stand-in for his child, he understood the true malice of the Tokoloshe. The creature was twisting his grief, using the burial site as a gateway to torment Nomusa and steal her soul. The chittering intensified, swirling around him like a swarm of angry insects. Though he saw no distinct form, he felt the presence of the dwarf-like creature, a cold, sickening weight pressing against his back. He did not look up. He had only one task: to destroy the effigy. He raised his machete, the heavy blade glinting faintly in the pre-dawn darkness.
The moment the blades severed the wooden neck of the figurine, a shattering, unnatural scream tore through the morning air. It wasn't the shriek of a small creature, but a sound that resonated with the terror of an ancient power being broken. The cold weight lifted instantly from Themba's back. The high-pitched juttering vanished. The persistent, heavy heartbeat sound stopped. Silence fell, absolute and total. Themba knelt, breathing heavily. The effigy lay in 2 broken pieces in the grave. He covered the pieces and the grave, scattering the Sengoma's protective ash over the soil. The horror was over. He returned to the hut as the sun broke over the hills. Nomusa was no longer rigid and staring. She was asleep, the deepest sleep she had enjoyed in months, her face still but relaxed. When she woke, the cold, stale smell in the hut was gone, replaced by the familiar scent of wood smoke and earth. She looked at Themba, and the terrible blank emptiness in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet, deep sadness. The human sadness of loss, not the cold grip of malice. The Tokoloshe was banished, its dark anchor broken. The family had lost their baby, but they had saved their souls. The villagers of Kwadladla learned a terrifying lesson. Grief, when left unattended and unhealed, is the easiest path for the small, malevolent things to walk. And sometimes the most dangerous thing you can bring home is not a curse, but a souvenir of your own despair.
That's all for today. If you like the video, let me know by hitting like. And if you are new here, be sure to subscribe for more. You can watch another video of mine right here. See you next time.